It's real. Andrew Peterson, welcome to the Seattle Network, and thank you for being here.
I'm excited to be on the show. I think I've done a lot of recordings of things. This might be only my second time doing a live recording. So,
What an honor.
Yeah. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. It's amazing. Yeah.
Of course. Look, we both have one person to thank for reals, and his name is Kyle McCullough, CTO and co-founder of Uptown. And when we've been playing ping pong for quite some time since last year, you and I, and when asking you to be part of the C-suite, to say, what he has said about you has basically given a lot of mileage for me about you. And so, and I really respect that. And so one thing, and it was based on your principles, your characteristics, all the value stuff that really kind of makes you as human. And so when I learned about you, it was very much about, you're very much founder-led. That is very exciting for me. But mainly, because of that, I was able to learn so much about you in how we've connected thus far.
Well, it's always nice to hear when people are talking behind your back, they say good things. When you're not there, it's like
that's the most important thing, even in sales, right? It's about what's happening when you're not in the room.
It's a huge endorsement. Yeah, it's a huge endorsement. So Kyle's great. Love him and the Ops Helm team in general. But very nice to hear, and thank you for sharing that. Yep.
Yeah, of course. And so, I mean, like everyone who has talked about you, that they've said to me, they're like, he's legit, he's awesome. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy is just like running through Seattle.
I'm going to be a huge letdown now, unfortunately. Like they've built me up way too much. So, you can cut the recording off anytime you need to at this point.
We're done here now. Okay, so, but no, I really respect it because, it's something where you've been a founder yourself. You're a founder currently. And it's really amazing because someone who talks about as being 0 to 1, understanding about how to be employee number 0, understanding how to grow. You went from like 0 to 100 mil with Signal Sciences. That's like not, no big deal, right, Andrew? And so, I mean, the wisdom and the mentorship, the guidance, you've actually done it. This isn't something, you're not just an investor running around town, cutting, checks here and there. Like you've been through the turmoil, you've seen the ups and downs, and that's what makes you such an incredible player.
It's funny because as I've been learning more about the history of venture capital, I think that's kind of where the roots of venture capital came from, is that a lot of founders kind of saying, there's not a lot of early stage sources of where you can get funding for things. Like, let's create an industry around this. They did. And so it's a little bit kind of getting back to the roots of VC. But, my interest in getting into VC in general and doing investing at all is really based out of the experience of building a company, of saying, I would love to be the type of investor that I would have loved to have myself, right? And the more experience of people that have actually kind of gone through it in the room that you can have, I don't think you can get enough of that around the table if that's what you're looking for in terms of getting advice to be able to build a company.
Yeah, no, totally. And going into the whole founder and investor dynamics, that's our first bullet point. And I'm so excited to talk about this with you because if everyone has seen the LinkedIn post, you have not only invested in one company, you kind of invested in, you just went, you're like, hey, let me just invest in a ton. And you've done such a great job at that because, it's something to publicly be out there to, have your reputation in the sense of hey, I'm really going to back this person. At the end of the day, you and I, we really know for B2B, it's about people. At the end of the day, it's always about people. The best part of it is people. The worst part about it is people. And so in this conversation, we're going to go really nitty gritty about the founder and investor dynamics, which I think you have an incredible insight on. And the second thing is conflict resolution, because you're a dad, so it's amazing how you've been able to do all of this startup stuff, and then you had cloud babies, and then you was like, hey, I'm gonna have some human babies, and then I'm gonna have some more cloud babies. So we're gonna go into that, some things that you may have learned through, the before and after parenthood, and then after that we can talk a little bit more about executive decision making, which really leads into accountability of all the tricks and trades of maybe you have learned, because really the greatest thing about mentorship is everything that you have learned and from your experience. And then everything after that, I mean, it's based on their unique experiences, right? They're going to be inspired by you, the sparks from you in some shape, form. So let's talk about the founder investor dynamics, because I feel like you have a very specific point of view on this, because there's different power dynamics depending on where the market is. Sometimes the founders can have, better leverage when they're looking at the term sheet, and investor might, just depending on the market situation. So what's your point of view on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here. And I think the real question is kind of, well, there's lots of different angles that you can look at this over. But I'll start with this, which is, if you're a first-time founder, fundraising is just a huge gap that you're going to have in your experience going into it. Like, you might know lots of other parts of building a business or building software or getting customers or all that stuff, but like, if you've never gone through the fundraising process before, you can read about it, but it won't do much justice to actually going through it. And so I think it's an area that I have. I try to write more content around this because of trying to help founders kind of get up to speed and kind of be in a little bit better position when they're going into a process like this. So a few things off the bat that I try to tell founders. When I raised money the first time and I was going in to talk to a professional investor, which is now, I guess, what my title is, like, I assumed that the process was going to be very scientific, in the sense that we tell them what our business was, we tell them what our business model was, we'd hand over a bunch of documents, we talk about what we're doing, we talk about what our customer profile was, and really explain the business. And then they would, take all these pieces, put it into some, spreadsheet or system that they have, and like a valuation would pop out right the other end. Yeah. This is legitimately what I thought. Like, and I actually think it's not that far off from potentially what other founders think about this. And what I kind of first thing I tell people is, like, there's a lot more art than science when it comes to fundraising.
Bingo.
Like, a lot more. And so, like, you know this well, but storytelling is really important. Knowing your audience is really important. Like, preparing for the actual performance of the pitch is important when you're doing these things. And that's like one side of it, right? And then the other side of it is understanding the actual process of how some of these decisions are made. And I think both sides are areas where founders, it's just sort of not intuitive how the process would work, number one. And number two, it's not intuitive that it's more of an art than it is a science. And so, like, I'll just say one quick thing on the process point that I've talked about more recently, but like, the process side, founders, I think you tend to get caught in this concept that, like, I'm pitching one partner at a firm, and that partner is going to make a decision on our future. And it's not wrong.
The blue jay.
Yeah, I mean, your first conversations are with, typically with one partner within a firm. But I think that the reality is that these firms run in typically in a everyone has to say yes type of thing to an investment within the firm. Now, the number of decision makers in a firm is going to depend on the firm. It might be a department within the firm if it's a really big one. But you're not just pitching one person, you're pitching a group of people. And that group of people...
You don't know who those stakeholders are either. Some could be totally silent.
Totally. Yeah, I absolutely do not know. And sometimes the partner doesn't know either. Like your main point of contact, sometimes they don't know.
You're right.
Legitimately.
You never know who's watching.
No, so I think the thing, so a lot of people will tell you this advice, which is also like, hey, as a founder, if you're going to pitch investors, like, get ready to hear a lot of no's. And I agree with that generally. Like I think that there's a lot of, more often than not, you're going to get no's than you are going to get yeses. But the reason for that, I think, is unclear. And part of the reason for that, at least, is, look, you might convince one of the partners there and they might be super, super into you and love you, but you're literally trying to convince potentially 10 to 20 people to say yes, and everyone has to say yes. And there's 1,000 reasons to say no. And there needs to be a ton of reasons to say yes, and all of those people need to say yes all at the same time. So it's if you just think about a consensus-driven like process where everyone unanimously has to say yes, and again, this isn't the same for every fund, but like very commonly it's like that. No wonder you're going to get so many no's like in that process.
But this is also one-on-one in stakeholder management, right? It goes into what you really specialize in, which is B2B enterprise software. You have to deal with this every single day. This is your craft. This is your mastery in really, right? It's like you have all these stakeholders, how to communicate with all of them, how to deal with the naysayers, how to answer questions without you having to be in the room, right? One, and then two, how can you enable that champion as well to be able to say it in a way that when it's going through, it's not filtered, right? Or the most important part of it, it's not not necessarily delivered incorrectly, I guess.
Yeah, and this is some of the better advice I've actually gotten. I got this from another founder, and I pass this on. I love taking nuggets and learning from other people and then passing it on to other people. But one of the things that they do going into pitches with like a partnership or a group of investors within a firm is they ask the main person, let's call it your champion, right? Or like your main partner that's bringing you in. They say, hey, prepare me. Who's going to be in the room? How should what are the what are the potholes? Where are people going to ask questions, and like what should I be prepared to answer in terms of these potentially like challenging questions? And like they want you to win like just as much as you do, because they want you to look good in front of their partnership. That's the reason why they're bringing you in. If you look bad in front of they look bad in front of the partnership, right? And so I never thought about doing that, and in some ways, I'm sort of surprised that more investors don't proactively do this with people coming into pitch. It might be because they kind of want them to just see if they'll fall on their face or not, right? Like they do it as a test. There's a lot of these sort of type of test things that people do like that.
It's like SAT in high school over and over and again in many various different shapes and forms.
Except you don't know the rules, and you don't know who's proctoring the tests, and you don't know what the right answer is.
Okay, hold on, Andrew. Now we're getting to it. Okay, when it comes to the rules, right? So with the founders and the investors, let's say there's a board, right? And we're on the chessboard here, and we're looking, okay, what's the next move that we have? What are the rules? What am I really playing with? And it's like how to actually get to the standard, right? So understanding what the standards are to have integrity, right? To be accountable, to be seen as someone that you do want to be able to work together with. This is something, because you have to be a great steward in time and money, because you're all in it together and you're going to be winning. You just increase the pie so more people can win, right? In some shape or form. And that's why you're investing. So can you talk a little bit more about now that you're kind of like full on as an investor, and you are, you're technically hiring all the time in the sense of when it comes to like, founding teams, right? You're talking about C-suites because, with your experience of being a chairman, a CEO, founder, like you've done it all kind of thing. You're like check, and multiple times too. This isn't just like a one shot kind of scenario. And so like when you're doing all of this, what is the things that's top of mind for you lately of that you wish that the dynamics between the founder and investor, because you're on the board, right? You're on the board and there's only so much you can do on a quarterly basis. You have to but you also have this incredible relationship in the essence of an operator. So whatever you bring to the table, right? You're like, hey, this is how, an operator is supposed to kind of operate. And to be a world-class operator, what are those standards from your point of view that they can work on today, that maybe you've been yelling in the ether the past months or weeks or days?
Look, there's no cookie cutter is the short version, right? And like I think that at least what I tend to bring to thinking about investing and decisions around investing, there's two different pieces. One is like deciding to invest, and then there's what's the relationship look like after you invest in that company. Right.
Yeah.
And like it's actually two very different things. And that's another thing that can be a little jarring for founders to go through that of being like, oh, like we got this crazy champion, we just had this closing dinner, we're all happy, and then you go into the board meeting and you get yelled at. Like, and you're like, wait, I thought everything's good. Like, what's going on? And by the way, like yelling actually doesn't typically happen in board meetings. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. But like, it's just those are two different things, right? For just as a side note, for Aviso Ventures, like for our venture thing, we don't take board seats, and that's on purpose for a couple of reasons. But like, one of those reasons is that we want to maintain as close of a relationship with the founding team as possible, such that they feel like they can always share whatever they want with us, right? Like the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, like, this is another thing that I sort of look back and I'm like, oh, cute, naive Andrew. When we started our company, I really viewed, we established a board from the beginning. I had a great board. I had Michael Deering from Harrison Metal and Bryce Roberts from now Indie VC. And they're super supportive, great board members. And then every time you add an additional board member, dynamics can change over time. And I think one of the things that I had to
everything.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I had to learn was that like managing your board, this concept of managing your board is a thing. Like, and there's lots of dynamics that go into thinking about that. But it's the short version that I tend to tell people is like, you want to maintain a great relationship and a great reputation with all of the board members that you have because they are representing you and your company, but like specifically you, the CEO, to the rest of their partnership. And if things go bad, and if things are going bad, you want them to still have your back and represent you positively internally to their investing teams. Because if you don't and you get soured and have soured reputation within those firms, like things can go south, like for your relationship with those firms quickly, right? And so the one of the things that I tend to tell people is like, look, don't bring problems to your board unless you have a solution in mind already. Like, don't just bring a problem and say, hey, here's a big problem, and like, let's solve it together as a board. Like that's you can have that conversation with that board member not in the boardroom, and you can brainstorm essentially with a specific board member if you think they're going to be helpful with you solving a problem. But this is part of the thing that like you see across the industry is that a lot of board member investors, or investor board members, they don't have operating experience. They can pattern match across other successful companies that they've worked with from experiences they've had on the boards of those companies. But by lacking in personal operating and or founding and or successful operating and founding experience in any of those places, you're going to get a limited point of view in terms of what types of help they're going to be able to give to very practical and everyday experiences. And so that tends to be my blanket advice, which is if you're going to bring up problems at a board meeting or with your board, I'd highly recommend that you have solved or have a solution in mind before you bring those things up.
Okay, hold the phone because because this is literally what my business mentor talks about. It's like you can have investors, but you cannot be seeing them as this incredible stakeholder kind of thing. It's your job actually as the operators to say, hey, this, it's the accountability part, it's the honesty part, it's the hard truth of hey, we didn't make that milestone that we thought we were going to, but this is what we're going to do to rectify the solution, the situation, the circumstances, all that kind of stuff. And that is when you change actually in that moment of the confidence that even though things may have gone sideways, this is how we're going to go through. And we need you to support in XYZ ways. This is how we're going to ask for help. And that is how you can really change
you change the
currency of everything, right? And then the other thing that you're talking about, oh my God. Sorry, just a mic drop, Andrew. When you're talking about the dynamic, it's really interesting because I think I want to contextualize the founder part of it because what you're really saying to founders is, if there is a problem, you need to be able to talk about it, right? But it's talking about it and communicating in a way that is not only pragmatic, but you're supposed to find a way how to make all the stakeholders happy in a way. Because when we're talking about VCs in the VC world, we're talking about for-profit, right? We're not talking about a nonprofit situation. And so, we're all in it together. But mainly, the point is, when we're talking about the monies and being good stewards of monies and time, I think it's that updates, right? And I think that's a lot of the things that you have talked about in a lot of your writing about communication updates, and it's proactive, right?
Yep.
It's proactive and saying, hey, this is happening, but this is what's actually happening. And so that you don't have to be second guessing, and it's not a guesswork situation.
By the way, it's a great point that you bring up. And I probably don't talk about it enough, but the very best companies that we work with send monthly updates, and they're pretty straightforward about what did we get done, what did we not get done, where do we need help. Like basically highlights, lowlights, and areas where we need help, and doing it consistently. And I've just found that like the companies I'm having to pull it from them. It tends to be, it's either a sign that like, it can be the opposite actually. It's like either the sign that they're so busy that they're just trying to keep up with stuff. But honestly, even those companies tend to be pretty good at sending updates if they're super busy and having a lot of success. But the ones where like, you don't have great things to send in every single update, and so you just kind of clam up and you turtle head and you say, I'm just going to go into my shell and try to figure stuff out. Like it makes a hard situation harder. Like if that makes sense. But like it's also there's like these basic rules in business, but it's just kind of like if you have bad news, you should let everybody know immediately, right? Like the faster you let people know, the better in that sense. Because ultimately, it gets back to what you're saying, which is like you're building trust and reputation with a group of people where, the reality is a lot of the businesses we invest in, it's B2B enterprise companies, and it's a long cycle to figure out if you make a decision to having successfully executed that decision, because maybe your sales cycle is 9 months. And so you won't know for 9 months until that thing is ultimately successful from a business perspective with dollars coming in the door. So the name of the game is still about trust and reputation. So And that gets it. Just the core of that is communication.
And I think this is a great segue to the second bullet point of navigating conflict resolution, because it's a thing. And so there's one thing that we talked about, the problem space of, there's founders and investors, and you're totally right. With investors, they might not have, most of them do not have a lot of the skill sets of the actual operation side. This is what makes you so special, Andrew. And I'm talking about special in a good way. So it's a positive. But this is where your lens is so different, because there's a lot of investors that just cut the checks and then, not being able to provide the actual guidance or mentorship that is necessary. But even just leading by example, you've led, But like, you don't just freaking talk the talk, you walk the walk. Not a lot of people can do that. So that's a big something to be proud of. But like, it's how to really operate through the hard situations when things aren't going well, and when things are going well. You can have good problems and bad problems, but to be in the game of business, to be an active player and an active participant, for you to be a CEO, like, you are choosing hard. You are choosing for problems. You're just you're just choosing which set of problems you want to have. No?
Yes. Yeah.
So what are some conflict resolution best practices you have, like, what have you been able to navigate?
There's a lot, but I sort of laugh, and my wife will probably cringe at me for this, but like, her and I talk a lot about some of these things, which is basically like, look, the goal of our relationship together and our marriage together is not to have no problems.
Right.
Like, I think some people think about these things in the context of like, oh, well, like if we just didn't have any problems and things would be no, there's going to be problems, and this is the same in a company. Like, you are going to have problems, and everybody knows that you're going to have problems. And so what's the goal then, right? Like the goal is that you're really good at identifying the problems quickly, and you're really good at resolving those problems. Like, and as I talk about again with my wife, it's like totally applicable, by the way, to business as well, which is like
100%.
We when we first dating and stuff like that, I was like, we're not naturally good at this. Like we need to get better at it and learn how to get better at it. And the only way we're going to get better at it is by doing it. And like basically having hard conversations and going through those motions of being able to, not be afraid to talk about the elephant in the room or not be afraid to talk about the hard thing in the room. And so again, it's not rocket science in many ways, because it's basically just like, hey, talk about hard problems and talk about them early and work through those problems and solve those problems. But like, if you're talking about how do you do that with your board or with investors, I mean, there's different stakeholders that are going to be involved. And I think that's what's really hard. Like the hard part is not so much like, oh, you're going to talk about problems. Like, duh, right? Like I think we sort of know that, despite the fact that it's a lot easier said than done. But I think the real question is, who do you talk to? How do you come up with solutions? How do you implement those solutions? When do you talk to them about these things? And so there's sort of this sequencing of how to go about solving some of these problems and then communicating the solution to those problems over time, that I think that part's, it's hard. Like there's not generally I would say try to solve the problem before you talk to your board, for example, or talk to other investors about it. But like if you have problems that are on the horizon that you think are coming up, like you got to have plans and you got to have backup plans.
Yeah. And I mean, you were an athlete in college, random thingamabobber, and I'll get there in a second. So you're an athlete, and so you're naturally competitive. And so, but you understand teamwork. And so where you're getting at with your wife, you're like, hey, we're a team. We have to go through the reps. We have to, we're not going to win all the time, but if we can outweigh the wins over the losses, we're doing great, kind of thing. And that includes in communication and the number of scenarios, whether it's about finance, whether about time, whether it's about people, all the things, right? Yeah. Things that are outside of our control, kind of thing with Bobber. And so how would you then define, or what's best practice for you in regards to team? How would you define teamwork? Because that has nothing to do with, spousal relationships or anything of the sort. It's more about the value of it.
Well, I mean, you could say that team relationship matters, like with your spouse, if you start having kids, right? Because like you gotta think about the dynamics there. But the thing that I actually, so other side note, yes, I was an athlete. The other side note is that my dad was a psychologist, and he worked with kids in the school district for a long time, and then he worked with a bunch of families and stuff over time. And so I've sort of been lucky to have somebody at least to talk about like conflict resolution with over a long period of time, and I had like very, very, very good.
Hold on, what did he teach you? What? Oh my gosh!
So an example was like in our family we had like a family meeting every week, and if you had some grievance during the week, you can write it down on an agenda, and then you talk about it at the assigned time that we had for the family, so that like it gave a place to go for issues that would come up that you couldn't solve in the moment. And I think it's actually pretty relevant as it relates to teams. And so there's a couple things that I would say as it relates to this. I'll talk about that, and then I'll go back to sort of another core fundamental that I preach, at least, which is, so the first thing is, look, have executive meetings, have times that are set up where you can speak with your leadership team and talk about how you want to get on the same page together. And like that space needs to be a space where people can ask questions and like, and real ones, right? Like the elephant in the room stuff you need to be able to talk about like in that space. And if you can't, you got to figure out why you can't. Because like there are broken down relationships in the context of things if you can't have those conversations, and like you got to find a way to fix those things, like because it will really stop you from being able to grow and to execute well, right? And so, by the way, like I am not great at that. Like I had to learn this over time with our team, and really I try to identify like where those problems were, and it's not always obvious. Like you might think, oh, it's about this relationship between these two people and they have a hard time like communicating or something like that, and you can work on that a lot, and like sometimes you just don't get anywhere even though you're able to identify it. So being able to identify those problems in the first place, hard. Being able to solve those problems, actually potentially harder. And so again, I'm not claiming to be great at it. It's just like if you aren't thinking about it proactively, I think it's very hard to be good at it. So like back to your point, see, like this is a muscle that you need to exercise. You need to work at it to get better at these things. And the goal is just to try to get better at these things, all the time.
The reps and discomfort is real, and that's where the growth is.
Yep. And so then the second piece of this that I tell people is like, look, when we started our company, we had there's 3 founders. There was me, Nick, and Zane. And like some of the feedback we got from almost everybody we talked to was like, hey, one of the 3 of you, if not 2 of the 3 of you, are going to be out of your team within a year. Within the next 12 months, they're like, I had people literally say, I will bet you $10,000 that you will not be together in a year. We stayed together the whole time. We still talk daily now, right? This is 15 years later. And to me, it really comes back to a commitment to working on our relationship together all the time. And like thankfully they were bought in on that, and it was something that I basically told them, again, sort of as a derivative of a lesson that I learned from my dad about my marriage and about our family, is that like, hey, if you and your wife like aren't on the same page, it's going to be really, really not constructive for your kids. Like your kids are going to suffer as a result of them knowing that you are not on the same page. I think the same applies in companies and running companies, which is like certainly if the founders aren't on the same page, people are going to know. If the executive team isn't on the same page, you're going to know, and it's going to cause problems. And the simplest way to explain this is that your teams just aren't going to be efficient or effective if that happens. They aren't going to be as efficient or effective as they could be if it did. And so like that doesn't, again, sorry, this is like a theme. This stuff doesn't just happen. You have to work on these things. And so like,
no, it's work. It's the work, right?
Yes. so like
you can't
I would have
put it
ups
under
and
the
downs.
rug.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have arguments and stuff all the time with my founders, but we would have arguments that were productive, they were respectful, they were based out of like a sense of we wanted to win together, but we made space to be able to do that together such that when we were in broader groups, we wouldn't. I think there's a lot of cultures that can actually maintain that, where you can have debate with your founding team or with your executive team in front of like lots of other people. Like it's just not something that we tried to go for. And I think it was ultimately very helpful for folks because they knew that we were always solid together.
Yeah.
And if we were solid together,
unity and harmony.
I think it creates confidence, number one, and then I think it creates safety, where you're like, there's not some back part of your brain being like, man, the founders just fought about this thing. It's like, is that going to impact like what's going to happen? Yeah. We just tried. That was not a thing that we wanted people to think about. Yep.
Right. Yeah, you want to be focused on the agenda, be clear where you're going, be in the same boat, row at the same time so that you can get there faster.
You got it.
And I love what you talked about with your dad. I think that's super important. It's about frequency. He designed a very incredible environment, it sounds like. That's awesome, by the way, for you to be able to do that.
I thought it was normal. And then like the moment I got like old enough to, and I was like, whoa, that's really not normal.
Healthy and functional, Andrew.
I know.
That was awesome. But it is very healthy and functional for that to be weekly. So it's saying, hey, if something wrong happened, you have a place that, like a destination that you can go every single week.
Yep.
And that you can collect your thoughts. You're able to write it down. Even that writing down part, man, he's smart. Was he also a lawyer? Because
no, that's my brother. My brother became a lawyer.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Probably because of the conflict resolution that we were able to develop together.
Seriously. Yeah. But like when you're writing it down, I mean, it's different, right? You're processing it in a different way. It's like, what do you want out from this? Is this something that like? There's a lot of self-audit that's actually happening, and then you're able to kind of slay the boss of emotion emotional regulation. And so that helps you to understand the distance between, you know, how you actually felt about it, what you actually have to learn from it, and then what you need for people to hear from you so you can feel heard and seen, but you can also address, hey, this crossed XYZ boundaries, or I'm not comfortable with this or whatever. But that's amazing for you to have been able to practice that as reps, and then be able to practice that with not obviously yourself, but with your family members, to be able to do that, and then now bringing that through and probably embedded in a lot of the cultural practices that you're pulling through in all your initiatives.
Yeah, and I would say, at least in my experience, like most of those types of harder conversations, they would happen one-on-one, like with very, you know, like let's say we had a team of executives that I was working with, like they'd happen one-on-one, and you know, it's fun. I don't know if you've seen this like trend of CEOs talking about how like you should never have one-on-ones with your like team, and you know, your time is more valuable than that. Like I struggle with that piece of feedback personally. I struggle with it too. Like, yeah, I struggle with it because I think it might make sense at some scale. Like at some scale, it might make sense, but to me, like your relationships with the people that you're working with that are directly reporting to you are so important to be strong. And like maybe you say, okay, well, you know, you don't have a scheduled one-on-one, but let's say you still meet with people every other week, like just because you have stuff to talk about all the time. Okay, that's fine, but that's kind of the same as having a one-on-one.
But this is basic people management, HR stuff, right? Yeah. When you don't do a town hall and you don't obliviate people in front of everyone. No one's going to feel good about it. This is like basic interpersonal dynamics and skills, and people don't like to be shamed, and like you wouldn't do that. This is not good leadership. But if you do it one-on-one and saying, hey, you know, this is what happened. I wasn't, you know, but that's also practice. This is the thing. It's hard. This is not easy. And it's not like, oh, this person was talented about that. Like what you even like humbly said, you know, you have gone through so many experiences that you had to figure it out. Like you had to figure it out, and you got better over time. And that's amazing, because that's the humility that is necessary to say, hey, you know, I didn't do it right this time, but I'm going to try better the next time. Because that's all we can really do, right? Is do 1% better tomorrow. This is the best version we got right now.
Yeah. I think the other thing that's been, I think, a helpful thing for me in life in general is to understand that like there's lots of different ways to solve a problem. Like just because like I did it a certain way, and like it's funny because like CEOs I talk to now, like I almost always give this like disclaimer before because they call me and they say, hey, I want to get advice on this thing, and I'll give a disclaimer, and they're like, you've given me this disclaimer every single time. I get it. Like, and the disclaimer is, you have way more information than I do about this problem.
Right.
I have an opinion, and I will give you an opinion because I think it's important. That's what you're trying to get. You want to get data, so you're trying to get data from me. But like, I will not be upset if you take my data and my opinion and do something completely different, right? So like, you're in the seat. You have to make the decision. I trust you to do that. Like, but I am also going to give you my opinion on these things, right? And so I think it's just something else that I wish founders heard more often, in the sense of like, I trust you to figure it out. It's like, this is a parenting thing also, which is just like, if my kids come to me, I talked to my wife about this, they come to us and they ask us to solve a problem for them, and then we're always solving it for them because we have the time and the energy and we just want to devote everything to them, then not only did they not solve the problem themselves, but it takes away from their confidence that we don't think they can solve it.
Right.
Like, instead of like, now what we try to sort of default to is like, hey, I trust that you can solve this. Like, now again, the caveat with a founder is that like, look, this is a professional experience. Like, they're adults. Like, they don't need to be like, they're not children. And so I'll give them my opinion, but I also trust them to make the right decision.
Yeah, there's also days though that they're just adults, like 8-year-olds in adult bodies. So.
That's not wrong.
There are those days. There's one thing that you shared about your dad, so I'll share something about my dad in what you just talked about here. And he always taught me that it's really good to get advice from everyone, because you want to hear the different perspectives and stuff like that. But you see it like it's on the table. there's like almost like poker in a way. Like you have these different cards and there's all these different advices. That doesn't mean you have to take any of them, but you should see what's on the table. And you should be grateful that that person put that advice on the table. If it didn't work out for you, that's okay. There's nothing personal about that at all. You just didn't take it, but you can also communicate that as well. Like, hey, thank you so much for that. You know, it didn't work out. You know, that's not the direction I went to. And that is part of the reciprocation of, you know, giving value to each other, of taking the time to be able to think about the other person, which is huge.
Totally.
And that's part of relationship building too.
You know, there's something that I...
Where are we going, Andrew?
No, I'm sorry. I'm just thinking about you know, you have conversations a lot of times with founders, and founders like building companies is hard. Like if it was easy, everybody would do it. Like it's a really, really not hard. Like it's a hard thing. It's not straightforward. It's not obvious. It's not. And you're stuck with essentially making decisions and getting, and things, by the way, the things that you seek advice on are typically ones where there's not an intuitive, obvious right answer for these things, right? Like this is why you're seeking advice around these. And so like, I think one of the other things that a lot of people just seek when soliciting feedback is that there's not some obvious silver bullet answer that they're missing. And like, the answer is almost always, no, there's not. Like you're right that A, this is a hard problem, and B, there's not a simple and obvious solution that you're missing, right? And I think so I think half the time when I give folks advice or they ask for my feedback about something, they're like, okay, this validates how I was thinking about this. And you know, occasionally I might give a different perspective on things, but like, you know, more often than not, these are very thoughtful people that are thinking about the problem. They have way more information than anyone else does from the outside, and so you know, they tend to kind of know what's right. And I think it's one of the things that has. I've worked with a coach for 15 years, and I still work with a coach now. Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of this. But I think probably the biggest gains that I've made by working with my coach is just learning to trust myself.
Oh, yes.
Yes. that my instinct and my gut are actually like pretty well informed, I guess is the right way. Like they tend to be the right thing. Like that I'm not just missing something. And so like to the founders that are out there, like I'll just tell you, like, and it's not a founder. It's like, you know, if you're doing your job and you're an expert at your job, like having the confidence to really trust that your gut and your instinct on things, like trust it.
Yeah. It's one of the second principle that my business mentor taught me was that even if you have 10% information, trust your gut on which way to go, because you have to trust the people around you. And not only that, it empowers you and enables you to not feel like you have to be a stronghold to just one decision. It actually empowers you to make another decision. So even if that was a bad decision, you make another decision, because you can always change your tomorrow. And that's the most powerful thing.
I love it. It reminds me of something where it's like the biggest bad decisions don't kill startups. Indecision kills startups.
Yes.
You have to make
the cost
decisions.
Of inaction.
Yes, and you it's especially the hard decisions where there's not an obvious answer. You just gotta make a decision and move on, and review to figure out try to gather as much information as you can after the fact to figure out if you made the wrong decision, and then course correct. Which also means by the way, you have to admit that you made the wrong decision in the first place to be able to course correct. Which that might be the harder thing. For some people, but I think you're right. I've seen
that's accountability though. That's hard.
Yes, it is. You're right. It is. Which I think is kind of your third area that you want to talk about. Yeah,
let's go here. So executive decision maker as a CEO, because you've been a CEO, you work with a lot of CEOs as being, in totality of you being an investor, you're working directly with CEOs, right? In the sense of what those updates are, what you're expecting, but let's just break it down to what this actually looks like from an organizational standpoint. There needs to be one executive decision maker to move forward, to be able to say yes or no, and it's ultimately their responsibility. And so when we're talking about the approach of decision making, let's talk about the standards of maybe some unspoken rules or maybe unspoken lessons that we can kind of dive into here, because I think it's really hard for people to understand that there's always going to be problems. It's just the problems that you're choosing. And the problems that you are labeling as problems might not actually be problems at all. And it just might be in your effing head. One. Two. And there might, because you didn't label the other stuff as problems, that might be just going, you know, it's on fire, and you're just neglecting that. And so just because you're not, you know, seeing it from your lens as that's a problem, but other people are seeing it as a problem, and collectively then you have more problems than you actually think there are.
Sure.
And so I think it's the identifying part that you talked about, first of all, is that identifying the problem is extremely hard, especially if you're so in it. And I think it's, you know, to gather more feedback as well, to be able to process that, and reminding yourself as a founder that it's not about you. The world does not center around you. Like to get to PMF, like you have, like it can take a life on its own, and you want that to happen. And so you have to like kind of go through the lines of how to actually be subjective, but then also how to be an expert, and then how to bring in what do people actually want and who you're actually talking to. Like you said in the beginning of saying, you know, you have to always be thinking about messaging, positioning, storytelling, practicing that over and over again, because you actually don't actually know who that nugget is going to be, because you don't know which fishing pond you're in, right? You're not really sure. I don't know if you fish, but like if you're fishing in the stream and you're only like looking, you know, you might just be fishing in the wrong place, and you have all these other people who really wants everything that you're doing, but you just didn't show up halfway of where they need you to be, right? Like they don't know you if they can't see you.
Well, it's I think it's actually kind of I think it was a superpower of our startup and our founding team and our company, actually. Like I think there's a lot of things that we did wrong. Like there's a few things that we did right, and I think we got a couple things really right on a regular basis, which was one of the things we got right often was, what is the problem we're trying to solve with this thing? Like, and really getting to the root of, okay, you might not like that thing and you might not like this, but like, what's the actual problem that we need to solve? And then what's the best solution for the business? Like, not for me personally, Andrew, or not for like another person in the company, but like, what's the best solution for the business? I'll give you, and I talked to a founder the other day, and it was making me think of this. Here's an example. This founder was having a hard time with their board member. And they were talking to me about this, and I asked this person. I said, "Well, what's the actual problem here? Like, I understand you don't like your board member potentially, or you don't like how they speak to you, or you think that they speak disrespectfully to you. Like, what is the problem that you want to try to fix?" I think we got to a point where they didn't like being in this scenario where they were feeling talked down to by that person. And, you know, then the next question was, do you feel like you will be able to solve that in that person? Do you think that you could change them to not talk down to you? And is it worth, like, what do you get out of that if you do make that? And kind of getting to this point of like, just really, is the problem just that you're seeing the person too often and you're talking to them too often? Like, do you think you can fix it? Do you want to fix it? Does it matter to fix it? And I think where we got to actually is that like, hey, unlikely to fix that person, unlikely to actually like get much out of it if we do fix it. So why don't we just not spend as much time with that person? Like, and that can solve the problem, because the problem is I just don't feel good around that person very often when they're talking to me. And so like, I think it's an example where like there's not a clear answer. Like, you know, what you really want to do is I want to have a set the record straight conversation with this board member, and like, let's just get on the right, you know, relationship page. And if it's like, look, the answer is you see that person for 2 hours every 3 months for a board meeting, and they're in the board meeting, and it's not very pleasant to be around them, but like that's all the time you have to spend with them. Maybe that's a better solution than like attempting to solve the problem with them, having it backfire, developing a terrible reputation for yourself within that person's firm and themselves. I mean, there's just a lot of scenarios where like you talk about examples of trying to make executive decisions on these things, and you're like, oh, well, it's so clear, but really like identifying the problem actually can be part of why it makes it so hard to develop a clear solution, because the problem's not clear either. So like that's sort of an example of that. And like, I don't know, I think to your point, you got to try to work on trying to get this right. Like, and it feels like this is a theme of our conversation today, which is like this doesn't happen without working on it. And so, you know, if you're in these scenarios where you're having some of these issues with making executive decisions, this is one of the other points that I'll just make on this, and then I'll stop. But is that you asked for like unspoken, right? Like what are some of the unspoken things around decision making in companies? I was talking to a founder the other day. He's worked at and been an executive in multiple different large, very successful startups. Like C-level, he's been at multiple large successful startups. He started his own 4 years ago. They've had a great amount of success, and he's the CEO, and this is $1 billion company now in terms of valuation. So he's the head of a unicorn. So he's got all this success so far. And he said, Andrew, like I thought the CEO role was going to be one where like I finally got to make the decisions. And the reality is it's the exact opposite. I still have to get everyone bought in on all the decisions that I want to make. I still have to sell people on this stuff, because you only have so much rope that you can get by making decisions and forcing everybody to go along with you on it. Like, and there's only a few of those decisions that you can really make. And by the way, like if you make those and they go wrong, like you lose the trust of the people that are around you really quickly. And so I think it's a misconception that people have about the role of CEO. I think people think the role of CEO is like, that they'll be like, finally I get to make decisions. This guy had been so close to that role for so long in so many other companies that he's been at. And now that he's in it, he's just like, it is absolutely exhausting. Yeah. Like, because you can't make those decisions on your own, and you have to get at least some level of consensus in the company. So like
consensus, that's the key word here. It's alignment, consensus. Yeah. It's, I talk about this analogy, Andrew, of like, it's like a house. You're selling to the front, which is the people who are, your prospects, your customers. That's one story, okay? Yep. Then there's the side of the house, and that's where the staff comes through. That is acquiring talent. You want to attract A players, right? And that's another story. Then that you're selling. Then the back of the kitchen, which, sorry, this sounds kind of weird because you're an actual investor, but it's with the investors. They see the shits and giggles. They see everything that's happening, and that's another story. But a lot of founders, they're like, oh my gosh, it was so exhausting to fundraise, like we were talking about beforehand. The fundraising thing is a full-time freaking job. And I just spent all this time doing that. And then they're not realizing, oh my God, you have to do the same process for all these other doors. Yeah. And they're all necessary to bring together the culture. Yeah. And so what you're talking about is, it is about consensus, alignment, recalibrating needs, wants, and expectations, right? And that's all part of the teamwork, which is an incredibly hard thing to master.
Well, it's multiple teams, to your point. That's a level deeper of the complexity of what the job actually is, which is like, hey, you have to do that, but then you have to do that across multiple different constituencies. And you've got to coordinate those stories together so that there's not like obvious, you're playing me with a different type of story, right? Like you got to maintain authenticity in the context of it. And so this is kind of the last piece that I'll say is like, you brought this up at the beginning, which is like maintaining character and value and values for people that are rooted in like, trying to do the right thing is sort of the short way to put it. But also understanding what your responsibilities are as a fiduciary to your business. I mean, like as the CEO of a company, my fiduciary is to make sure that the business is successful. Like, that's what it is. And you actually have like a role. If you're on the board, like, you have a role to do that. That's like bound by law. This is why like boards get sued, because they make decisions on some of these things, right?
Yeah.
And so like, I think maintaining that in the context of all the rest of the stuff around you that's hard to do, it's not recognized nearly enough for the people that are really doing an incredible job at maintaining amazing character and values in the context of making a lot of what end up being, gut wrenching and or very, very, very hard decisions.
This is why it's so freaking important about the quality of builders. And you and I know that very, very well. That goes through and through from the product. It is the founding, like, necessary principles and the pillars of what's actually going to make it sustainable. I want to wrap up with this one last question in the area, Andrew.
Sure.
So you've had a lot of babies, cloud babies, human babies. And my question here is more about whether it's parenting or reparenting. If there is anything through fatherhood and parenthood that through the next level of teamwork with you together with your spouse, that you were able to learn before and after of becoming a parent, because what I'm trying to say is, because I think your kids are kind of young right now, but when they get to the teenage side of things and they go through puberty and all that stuff, I feel like you've already gone through that adventure though, so I feel like you're kind of equipped to do this in like a very different way. And so I wonder, what's your point of view of what made you actually increase your skill sets through parenthood after you have gone through the startup side of things already? Because not a lot of people have a lot of those experiences and would have forced you through about people and humans.
Yep.
And all the
So I'm going to
psychology
answer
of
that.
it all.
I'm going to answer the question in a little non-intuitive way, which is, I think people tend to think about this, like, what can parenting and like, what can you learn from parenting that helps you with building companies? And I'm going to flip it. I'm going to say, what can you learn from building companies that has an impact on parenting? And one of the things that we've done, my wife and I have done, and she's been incredibly patient with some of my nerdiness on some of this, is that like, look, like, I want my kids to think of being part of our family as being a part of a set of values that we have around how we live a life and how we treat other people. Companies, people put lots and lots of time and effort into developing and building a culture in a company. It's defining values, it's having a mantra, it's having a mission, it's having like all these different things. You don't really do that in families. Like, people don't talk about that, of like doing that in families. And I think that like what happens in a family, at least what happened in my family growing up, was, religion was kind of a backdrop for a lot of the context around values for us. But then we didn't tend to be terribly explicit about, hey, being a part of the Peterson family means that we value these things. And I think what we are doing and what I plan to do more and more with our kids is to actually try to go through it, of saying, hey, here are some core values of what our family is. This is what we care about. These are how we live. Like, this is how we live our life a little bit. And like, trying to at least give a framework for our kids to be able to think about what values that they have as they're growing up, by being intentional about it and talking about it. Now, look, kids are kids. They're going to choose whatever they want. Maybe they reject it like patently or not. But I'd rather have them be thinking about it and thinking about what they value and how they value than not. And so, like, there's lots of things. There's plenty of things that I've learned, like, on the parenting side that I think you can apply to building businesses. And we talked about some of that, which is, the core things of, making sure that mom and dad are tight, making sure that you and your founders and your executive team are tight, because like it creates a really good environment for everybody else to feel safe. But like,
It's the environment. Yeah.
but I like this flip side thing also, which is like, hey, be clear about your values and your character and your mission.
But that's transformational leadership, so that you don't have to micromanage. They know there's an outcome, or like what they should be striving towards, what that North Star looks like, and it's value based, so that they can make those decisions by themselves. Because if it's not,
totally gives them a framework for decision making, like when they have it.
Oh, I love this so much, Andrew. We've covered a lot of ground about executive leadership. I think we've added a lot of value here.
Maybe
Andrew.
more than people thought they were going to get today. But,
Yeah. No, I think a lot of people have a lot to think about on a Tuesday night. Andrew, this has been so great. Thank you so much for joining me on such a heated conversation, because I think we all need it, in a way. It's a wake-up call. And, and even that one CEO that you were talking about, or that one executive, how they, even though they have this incredible background, right? That doesn't mean, it's like the market, right? The market is the uncertainty part of it. And to navigate uncharted territory, just because you've done it before, that gives you the leg up and some skills kind of thing. But to be able to actually navigate today, the committed version that you are today, makes all the difference. And it's what your focus is on today, how you're an active participant today, what are you dealing with, and it's just all these variables that you have to understand what your constant and what your variables, and how to create that safe and secure environment where you can thrive in, and everyone can step in that container, in that frame, and feel like they're being seen and heard, and having weekly family meetings to talk about the elephant in the room.
Well, on that note.
Andrew, high five. Thank you so much. This is awesome.
Yeah, thanks a lot.